So, hi again, everyone. So I'm Dom Shaw. I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, aka EDI coordinator for Yuki. So my role within the organisation is to support not only the Yuki itself, but its members and the wider games industry think about how to be more inclusive to the amazing people in society, regardless from whatever background people may come from. Um, I also support in kind of thinking about how they can make their recruitment processes more accessible and more visible to young and old talent, how they can make their workspaces much more inclusive and think about having a culture of development and improvement rather than making people like conform and be trapped in a box per se. And I do a range of other activities, including events, thinking about game representation and how developers can improve, and everything in between that relates to equality, diversity, and inclusion.
Amazing. And what do you find most exciting about working in this industry?
I think one of the best things about games that can work for anyone is the kind of friendly and casualness to it compared to a lot of other industries. So although from a front-facing perspective, it can feel a bit intimidating, actually, when you go to events or start to meet people, you start to see a much more friendlier side to the industry. And of course, obviously, there's all these exciting products and games that people can get their hands on and play. And what's really great about the work I'm doing is I get to work with some developers around accessibility to think about how they can actually make their games more accessible. But of course, my co-partner in this online virtual event has even more in-depth knowledge about that, so I won't go too much into that. But it is so great to see developers actually start to care more, but also bring that kind of friendly and passionate charm to wider audiences, not only through their products, but slowly through events and the wider outreach that they can do.
And would you say it is, I mean, you just mentioned accessibility, would you say it's quite an accessible industry, and why?
I would say we're slowly developing and becoming more accessible. I don't want to promise and say, oh yes, we're the I forget the word now, the king of the crop. I don't know if that's the right saying, but even though we're not at that point yet, we are developing. We are, working towards becoming a much more accessible industry. I can say that. And although there's a lot of improvements needed across the board, there's a passion and there's a desire that people want to learn and move forward.
And would you say employers are quite keen to increase diversity in the workplace? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's definitely, to be as transparent as possible, it can be a buzzword to some companies still, but there's a lot more companies on the horizon that actually do truly care and really push to make their culture as inclusive as possible, to kind of open it up to people of all ranges. I've seen a lot of companies, instead of just solely going back into the office now, I've seen them develop hybrids, and I've even seen some companies go fully remote. I'm happy to say Yuki is one of those companies that have gone hybrid. So anyone who would work for us can work from home and not have to commute in. And that's the same for a lot of other companies. So again, it's kind of we're improving, and again there's that desire to do more, be more, and I'm happy to say that's part of my job, to kind of enforce that to companies, because again, there's so many amazing people in this virtual event right now and who will listen to this podcast, and everyone who does should have a chance to get into games if they want to. And I definitely want to champion that push because, again, you never know what stars will appear until you try.
And how and when would you disclose a disability, and what happens behind the scenes once someone has disclosed a disability?
So to answer the first one, what I always recommend is that, again, it's always based on comfortability. So if you've had previous job interviews and you've not felt comfortable, I wouldn't say you should feel pressured to. Again, it's completely up to you. So that's the first kind of suggestion. But what I would say is if you do want to kind of test the waters and, disclose your disability, what I would say before you do that during the interview is either ask what a company's benefit packages and what support they offer is, or ask them about their culture. Because although both questions are quite open, they are quite also widely known. So there's no trapping yourself into an awkward moment by asking them because they're so commonly asked questions. However, by kind of looking towards the answer of the interviewer, you can determine whether you will want to comfortably disclose your disability. Because, for example, if let's say you ask about benefits and they're just saying, "Oh, you'll get fruit and veg every morning, and there's a bike scheme," and they don't really go into mental health, well-being, health support, they don't go into any of that, then it might not be worth disclosing and it might not be right for you. Equally, if you ask the culture question alternatively and they kind of quickly just give you a small line, just say, "Oh, we have great culture, it's great," without any depth, exploring whether they've got employee resource groups, whether they're championing any forms of diversity in-house, or whether their leadership is inclusive, and take the time to listen to stuff. If they don't really go into that depth, again, that's another sign that it might not be worth it. But obviously, on the opposite end, if they have a really good benefits and they support all forms of areas that people may need support with, and if the culture has a real passion behind it and it's not just insert blog here, then those are the moments where I would say, again, based on your comfortability, after hearing good answers, take the plunge. Because what normally happens with companies that are, again, that's why I always say do those kinds of questions first, because if you get a bad answer, normally what happens is the company goes back to the leadership and kind of disregards, which again isn't something that should happen, but it's something that can happen, and I've definitely seen it happen before. However, if the company responds with, again, that passion and that positivity within their answers, normally you'll find is that it's a very neutral recruitment process behind the scenes. So everyone is put, equally, it's all about skills first with those companies who give you the good answers. They measure up everything, look at the job, what's the specs, what are the skills they need, and equally look at everyone regardless of their background, because what they want is the people who match the skills, rather than insert this person. So again, by asking those questions, it becomes not only a way of testing your comfortability without actually pushing your comfortability in front of anyone, while at the same time testing the waters with an employer to know whether you should trust them or not. And I gave a big answer there, so I forgot what your second part of your question.
Well, my second part was what happens behind the scenes once someone has disclosed a disability.
So I partly answered that. So let's say you get response back and they want to bring you on board for the job. So what normally happens then is, again, depending on whether you've disclosed or not. So in this case, you've disclosed. What they normally would do is either the head of people support or the head of HR or head of ops, depending on the company, because companies have different like staff for those needs, but generally it would be a head of HR ops or people that you'd normally find that would approach you and kind of have like an onboarding one-to-one with you to say, what are the things that you're needing from us? What can we do to support you and give you the best start possible? And by having those one-to-ones, it allows the company to obviously get to know you a bit better, but equally make sure that they can put everything in place to bring out the best in what you can offer to them. Because again, if it's not a two-way equal street between an employee and an employer, it normally doesn't work great, which is again why the power of inclusivity and diversity is so important if it's channeled and focused effectively.
And I'm interested, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but you mentioned about good and bad employers. How common do you think it is for an employer to be good with reasonable adjustments, equality, diversity, and inclusion within the games industry?
I would definitely say over the last 2 years, obviously through the lockdown period, where before if I could be blunt about it, I'd probably say it would be a 50-50 before lockdown. While now, I'd probably say it's a 70 to 30% chance. So you'll still get some companies that may not have the processes in place or may not have the staff trained to put some of these reasonable adjustments. And normally those are indie companies, which are very small. And although obviously want to grow, they may not have that kind of sustainable foundation at first. But again, that's why it's so important that, as a company in themselves, they learn. However, most companies, because of lockdown, have had to come up with these solutions while we've been in it, and now have developed onboarding processes and kind of policies in place to really make sure that they can support staff and everyone, who gets onboarded properly and effectively, so that they get the best opportunity within the company as possible. So I would definitely say it's improved massively. Can still maybe find some companies that may not be the best at it, but reasonable adjustments has definitely been more embedded into companies during this period, and I'm definitely one for it because and as well, just from a legality standpoint, it is a legal requirement that every company does it. So technically, part of my job is to highlight that to companies, but also not just highlight it, but to give them that support and help them develop that. So hopefully in a few years' time, I can come back and say 100%.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And so the games industry is quite a competitive industry. What kind of applications or applicants stand out? Or how can you make your application stand out?
Definitely. I mean, if anyone listening has already on their way into the games industry or has already, attempted, definitely, and you'll definitely keep hearing this, is that for a lot of the jobs and roles within the games industry, portfolio is key. So it's the work that you've created and the quality of it. But depending on the role that you're going for will change what that portfolio looks like. So for example, if it's programming, you'll very much be highlighting pieces of code and games that you've either, maybe you've been in a few game jams or you've at a university, college, or a boot camp program that you've been able to create a game. Those are the kinds of materials you're going to show. And sometimes, again, depending on the developer, sometimes they want to see the work in progress, like blogs telling how you got from A to B. So that's worth taking note of. But what you can normally find is that a lot of these companies will say on their website whether they have that desire to read that kind of work in progress. So for anyone who prefers just to make stuff and not have to write up about it, and a more hands-on and visual in terms of like showing off what they've worked on, that can be accommodated in the games industry.
Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, just even for, there might be roles where you're thinking about where you want to help people, be a producer, or you want to work in the finance within a games company. All of these kinds of roles are relevant. So pretty much the only things you've got to think about is, do you have a desire to work in or around video games? And if you do, there's a role for you in the industry. There's space for everyone. And it's our responsibility in industry to make that more visible to everyone who can't see that.
And I mean, you kind of just answered my next question, but I'm interested if you have what do you recommend young people do if they want to get into gaming?
So for definitely those that are kind of on their first steps, I have kind of 5 key tips, and I'll share the link that I've made for a blog for it after, but just to kind of go through some of those tips. Now, I would definitely say some of the key things that people can do is look up companies, research them. So, their social media, their websites. Obviously, in the case of accessibility, if a company's website and their content isn't accessible, there probably won't be for you if you're looking for that. So it's important that you do that research, because actually that will already give you a heads up notice whether they've got that on their radar. Because if you're finding that they have captions in their video content, they have subtitles and all these other elements needed to make content more accessible, they're going to be a company that puts the extra thought into their people as well. Equally, I would definitely say know your rights, which is a very, very serious, intense one to add, but I feel it's really important that anyone knows their legal rights, especially if they are an underrepresented individual, just so that, they know the value of themselves. Because it's, when you're job hunting, regardless what industry, it can become very disheartening if you're just getting loads of rejections with no feedback or anything. So knowing your rights and kind of where you stand gives you a bit of that confidence. But equally, I always say, so for example, if you get a message back, even if it's an automated message saying, oh, you're not successful, always email either the contact that you've been talking to or the email that you've been supplied back, specifically asking for feedback. Because again, to gain those answers will give you skills, not only in communication, but be able to build that confidence back slowly. And again, know where you stand, where you succeeded, where you might have failed in the interview, so you can do better for the next role. That might be the perfect role. And then kind of last one, again, I'll make sure there's a link to the full article that goes into depths that I've created for this, but I would say look for small networking events around the video games industry. There's obviously, depending where you live, may change that, but there are a few different websites that highlight really small events to all the big events that happen in the UK. And again, I can supply those links so that once this is, launched out as a podcast, people can find those links and be able to find those events. Because when you're at those events, what's the nice thing is, as I mentioned earlier on in this, is that you'll be able to meet friendly faces. And as you meet more friendly faces and attend more events, may that be online, hybrid, or in person, regardless, being yourself, being charming, people will remember that, and people will remember going forward. So you'll just end up probably like after 4 events, you'll start to recognize people, start to know people, and really build rapport, and this makes your journey into games easier and more comfortable.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we will send those links out if you send it on to me. Yeah, thank you so much, Dom. We will move on to our questions for Sightless Kombat. So yeah, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone, Sightless?
There we go. Hello. Hi. Hi, everyone. I am Sightless Kombat, mostly just shortened down to Sightless Kombat or SK, any of those three. I'm an accessibility consultant and gamer with absolutely no sight whatsoever. UK based, if anybody is curious. And essentially, I'm currently self-employed, as people have termed me, a freelancer. But that basically means my job itself involves a lot of different coexisting elements. So I write reviews for my website, I stream on Twitch, I create content for YouTube. In fact, I've got a video coming out tomorrow as of the time of this recording, which is going to be very good fun, starting a new series. And, you know, but I also do work with studios, with publishers, and with, you know, anyone who'll listen in terms of, you know, video games all around the world. So I've had the great opportunity to work with Microsoft, Sony. I went to Valve once, which is quite surreal to even say. And in terms of that, though, I don't just work in video games. It might give that impression, but I do primarily work in video games. But I also am willing to talk things like 3D printing, like music, like, you know, sports accessibility, all kinds of interesting things. But yeah, my role is very much fluid, I think is a good way to look at it.
Wow.
And oh, I should say, to be clear, for those of you who might be interested, when I say I've never had any sight, well, when I say I've got no sight, I've never had any sight to begin with. So a lot of people are like, so how much can you see? I'm like, nothing, hence the name. So yeah.
No, it sounds like you've done so much. And how did you pursue a career in this industry?
Good question. My journey started about 7 years ago, probably, really, because I started writing accessibility reviews because I kind of saw a niche that wasn't being filled. The main question that was entering my head was, you know, if I get a product and I unbox it, you know, how do I unbox this with no sight and no assistance is the idea. Or at least that was, you know, that was where it started. And often I had to buy the products I wanted to use or wanted to look into. So one of the first reviews or pieces I put together was a guide to the original Xbox One, the console, you know, plus a few other things as well. But then one of my reviewing breakthroughs came around probably, you know, a year and a half later when an Xbox One S limited edition Gears of War 4 bundle review got picked up by a few people. I managed to get it into the hands of a few prominent people at Microsoft and at Xbox, which was amazing. That was actually supplied by the company. So getting that was brilliant. But you know, that's not all. So it was really kind of networking helped with that. But the biggest part of my career so far was really doing a Winston Churchill Memorial Trust traveling fellowship. So in the same year as I did the Gears of War 4 review, I had the good fortune to meet somebody who'd done a traveling fellowship with the WCMT. They're a trust that essentially they will provide grants to allow you to go off, study, and analyze the impact of whatever it is you're studying. You know, whether that's a cultural thing, whether that's an art thing, whether that's like a human rights thing, or you know, anything pretty much under the sun. And I met somebody who'd done one of these fellowships, and they happened to have met the folks behind the original Doom, which was absolutely amazing to me when they did their fellowship. And we got discussing. I had a desire to improve the games industry in what ways I could, and I thought the best way to do that would be to raise awareness firsthand. And this person very much enthusiastically agreed. So I then applied, got the funding to fly around the States for 5 weeks. Went to E3, went to the Microsoft press conference. I was there in the crowd. Went to Valve, went to Harmonix, who make Rock Band and the original Guitar Hero games. Went to so many great places, and included to networking at Microsoft's campus at an event they did, and all sorts of other things as well. But that was a big one in terms of pursuing the career, because those contacts, some of those people I still speak to today, and I'm still getting conversations going between me and those clients as well. So it's mostly just networking, trying to talk to the right people, even if it seems difficult to do. That's how I essentially pursued it, because I had a goal in mind. That goal still stands true. Make the industry sort of aware of the issues prevalent and personal to me in my case, and go from there and trying to assist with helping that forward. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting, and you kind of have answered my next question, but
sorry.
I'm interested anyway. Do you have any, what advice do you have for people starting out and gaining work experience in such a competitive industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I didn't gain what you would loosely call traditional work experience. I wasn't hired by like a games company or anything to do accessibility or anything like that, at least not sort of initially, before I started doing the things I do now as a consultant. But I essentially talked to what people I could. So if there was a game I wanted to review or a piece of tech I wanted to review, I tried to find like a press contact or just the right person to say, hey, I'm looking to review this. Could you perhaps assist me with that? Or, I want to play this game. Or even sometimes just tagging the right people on social media when you say, really excited about this game. And then they'll sometimes come back to you and be like, I've seen your videos. This is amazing. Is our game going to be accessible for you? Maybe not, but we want you to have a look at it anyway and give us feedback. That sometimes happens. So it's really a matter of taking those opportunities. If you get the chance to go for, a traveling fellowship, as I did, take that. Well, not even if you get the chance, but if you feel like that would help you and give you a great experience, which I'm almost certain it would, then, go for that. Or if you're invited to speak at an event like this, take the opportunity and try and impart knowledge where you can, because if nothing else, that gives you experience of speaking at events too. Because even when I've delivered presentations, things like EGX, I did a presentation on the Gears of War franchise. I've done presentations on audio description, all sorts of things at various conferences around the world, virtually and in person. And the best part of it is that is all experience. So, for one conference, I might have not put as much footage in, and then people said, oh, I'd love to have seen how this worked. And then, I would go and put the footage in for the next one, even if that was a different presentation. So it's all about carrying your insights from whatever engagements you get as a job, forward, and working with those to sort of shape how everything sort of lines up behind it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point. And what's your favorite project that you've done so far?
Ooh, good question once again. I mean, they're all good questions. So I've had the great fortune to work on a lot of fun projects over the years, but two that spring to mind instantly would be Horizon Forbidden West, the big PlayStation 5 release that happened at the beginning of the year. I had the amazing fortune several years ago to work with Guerrilla Games directly on that and go out and consult. I got to do a studio visit in the Netherlands with Guerrilla. They're a brilliant team. And the best part of it was I was partially at least responsible for the game's co-pilot feature. So that makes it the only PS5 game, to my knowledge, that you can play not only locally, but over the internet with sighted assistance, where there's no lag to deal with because it's all on the Sony side. So it's not going through, Parsec or any other online servers that need to handle anything. It's just going through PlayStation. And, as much as there are other accessibility features to use, which is the way it should be, Copilot should be part of it alongside those other features. It was great to be able to play with a sighted person, with Copilot as a sort of a connected experience where, even if I couldn't do everything as I would want to do, I would want full agency in a game. I could still enjoy it, and we could enjoy the same exact experience because of the way the game works. That being said, the console that derived Copilot, the Xbox One family of consoles, really derived Copilot as a feature term. I got to work on a great game, Gears 5. I got to team up with the Coalition a couple of years ago now and work on, or might have even been last year. Time flies when you're having fun, they say. But I got to work on navigation ping escape mode was the official name of the feature. We just call it escape ping. And that is a little feature that allows you to navigate and follow a trail of audio cues in that escape mode where you and two other players run through sort of a procedurally generated maze of sorts. Or well, it's tile generated, actually, I should say, tile generated maze. And the thing with that was I got to open up a whole mode for other players in similar positions to me, because when the game launched, I'd been wanting to play this mode since before launch, because whenever I played that mode, I needed a second sighted player to be there with me. So I needed me and a sighted player to be there to, guide me through the mode, which wasn't very fun because then I had to keep persuading sighted people to play the game with me. Escape ping comes along, after I've had the opportunity to consult on it, and I'm now able to run through these hives, these levels, these tile sets, and just, lead the way, which is brilliant. Because then people are like, how are you doing this? And then I have to show the feature off and they're like, wow. So it's a great conversation starter. Actually, both of those are great conversation starters.
That's amazing. And I mean, you kind of have just been talking about it, but how do you find navigating the industry with a visual impairment?
To be brutal, it's a struggle. It really is, because of the emphasis on visual content. So things like, images, screenshots, video editing, all that kind of stuff. Not that video editing isn't doable. I myself do as much of my own video editing as I can, but I did recently have to purchase a Mac in order to do that to the best of what I felt was my ability. So, you do have to figure out what will work for you. And kind of go from there. In terms of being able to travel to events, that can be problematic, but equally, if you have the right support and the right assistance to get there, that's great. You can work that through. Equally as well, collaborating online is a very useful way to navigate things. So in games that don't have enough accessibility, that I've played a lot of on my Twitch streams and on my YouTube channel and even reviewed, I've had sighted assistance through various methods, to make those things work. Even if I can't play all of the game, even if I can do parts of it, then we make it work between us. And that shouldn't be the way it is, but that's a way to also, build friendships, build connectivity amongst the industry as well. So, it swings and roundabouts, but it's a struggle, but it's getting easier. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's getting there, because companies are now noticing the value of alt text. They're now noticing the value of audio description. So Ubisoft, for instance, I worked on an audio described trailer for Watch Dogs Legion. I was actually the voice of that as well, in addition to mixing the AD into the final product. Pretty proud of that myself. And being able to, have those opportunities open to me as well is fantastic. So, take the opportunities, be aware that it won't be easy, but be persistent, as well as being, constructively critical. Don't be sort of rude about it. Just be constructively critical about, and feedback to the right people. But it will still be complicated at times.
And you mentioned being constructively critical, and I guess also, being visually impaired, you have to be able to advocate for yourself. How did you develop those skills, and what tips do you have for young people with being able to advocate for yourself or being constructively critical?
I developed those skills mostly through sort of trial and error and advice from other people as well, to a point, as time went on. Even in terms of reviewing games, there's been times where I've not sent reviews off or not published reviews rather, because they are so scathing, arguably, and damning, that it's better just to send it to the development team for direct feedback, so that then hopefully they can realize, it wasn't intended to be that scathing for whatever reason. It wasn't intended to be that way, but sometimes that just happens. A game is so inaccessible. It's like, this is frustration talking, but as long as they understand it's frustration and you're being reasonable about, this is how you can resolve it, with these methods that exist now, or, these ideas, then sometimes that can give teams enough thought. But I learned those skills as I went along, and every day you are learning skills. You don't just stop learning, essentially. But being able to advocate is crucial, because after all, who better to use these features, these accessibility features, than the people who are going to need those on a long-term basis and rely on these. Not to say the perspectives of more casual or temporary users. So people say, for instance, with the subtitles example is a classic one. So you have people with profound hearing loss or hearing difficulties who need subtitles on a regular daily basis on a constant level. But you also have people who, might have a sleeping baby in the next room, or might play at low volume because they don't enjoy, really loud gameplay. Those people need the subtitles just as much. But, being able to advocate from both sides of the spectrum is vital. So whether it doesn't matter what part of the perspective you're on, being able to say, this is my side of the story for this kind of feature. So if you need menu narration because you're sitting too far away from your screen because that's how your setup is, that's fine. If you need menu narration because, you process things more easily on an auditory level, that's fine. That's completely valid. Being able to share those perspectives with developers comes with time, comes with practice, being willing to be patient with developers when they say we're working on it, but also acknowledging, when other games have made progress, you could sometimes voice that as a concern and say, look, these games are making progress. What are we going to see these features in future installments of whatever series it is? But it's all about being tactful, being diplomatic, and understanding, that development takes time, and that's one of the big things. Development takes a lot of time and resources and energy, and sometimes it just won't happen as much as you want it to, which is a real shame. But you shouldn't have to live with it, but you do have to, if that makes any sense. But in terms of being able to advocate, it's mostly just a matter of finding a niche, carving it out, and just seeing who's willing to listen to you, making people aware of your perspective, and kind of going from there, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a really good point about accessibility being able to help more than the people who it's necessarily targeted for.
Exactly.
And what are your top tips for young visually impaired people wanting to get into the industry?
It depends what area of the industry you're looking to get into, really, because I've had people ask me over the years, how do you get into consultancy? I just did it by starting to review things from my point of view. So, my first-hand perspective of never having had any sight, you'll see me having unboxed statues on YouTube, having unboxed consoles, talking about the accessibility features in games. So just talking about stuff from your point of view is a good idea, even if it's just general observations. I'm finding this boss fight really hard because there's no audio cue for an attack, or this platform would be a lot more accessible if I didn't have to use a QR code to scan things in. I don't use a TV, that kind of thing. So it's a matter of engaging on a level that you feel comfortable on, and you feel might be missing whatever reason, because there's nearly always areas that can be improved in gaming. Even from things like controllers. I've had people say to me, Copilot should be standard in all games, as a feature. I'm like, yes, it should, but it should be alongside other options. And they're like, why? And I just say, because then I can have full agency and then show other people how they can have full agency as well. And they're like, oh, I get it. So finding those touch points, those areas of improvement that you can make work, and in general, just being able to, travel to what events you can, but travel isn't always, the only way to do it. Be willing to, talk online, virtually at events like this, find presentations or events that you want to go to network, because that's really how I started. So things like the Game Accessibility Conference, when it runs in both Europe and the US, I've spoken at that event a couple of times. They are amazing people. The people behind it are brilliant as well, and all the people who go there really have a passion for it. It doesn't have to be big studios you talk to. Sometimes small studios are willing to talk as well, but if the big studios want to talk, then go for it, take those chances, and make sure you get compensated for your time as well. That's a big thing. You may be freelance, but that doesn't mean free. But partly because as well, then you have an idea of how much like when even if a company says, hey, look, we'll give you a review code for this game, that's fine. If they say, oh, we'll give you, we have merch we can send your way, that's fine. Because how do you think, for reference, in the background, as there is currently a video feed for this, I have a giant collection of merch in the background that we sort of codenamed the Wall of Stuff, because there are so many items there that I've collected over the years. But that's the thing. Sometimes as long as you can engage with developers and they understand where you're coming from, that's it. Create content as well. So videos, blogs, websites of your own. Collaborate with other people. There's all sorts of avenues to consider, and know that even though it might feel like you're isolated and stuck and frustrated and unable to necessarily get to where you want to be immediately, those chances will come almost certainly through some form or other to make your accessibility dreams happen. And sometimes it's a matter of just waiting, doing what you can, and then seeing where everything goes from there.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. I will pass everyone over to my colleague James, who will run the Q&A. Yeah.
Hi guys. So we haven't had any questions come in the chat, but what we can do, we can see if anyone would like to unmute themselves. I'll try and keep it under control. If you've got a question for Dom and SK. Do we have any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I have a question about music and sports. I know someone mentioned about there's like accessibility for music and sports. What do you mean by the accessibility side of like music and sport development?
Well, so that was a question directed at me, to be clear. In terms of that, it was mostly just things like for my streams, I actually wrote all of my music that I use on stream, and that was through accessibility of complete control keyboards. So, the fact that those were accessible, even if other elements of the software aren't, but I'm not going to go into great detail on that. That's an accessibility thing that I've been looking into and learning about as I've gone along, and advised other people about as well. In terms of sports things, I heard about the Action Audio, I think it was called the Action Audio Tennis, the other week. I didn't get to watch it, unfortunately, but a friend of mine and fellow gamer without sight actually did get to see it, and he's been contacting developers himself who might be interested in potentially combining those with games as well. So there's multiple areas that the accessibility can come into, in terms of the various threads that can tie everything together. Even things like having audio description in, say, in trailers, in video games, all of that, that can also apply to sports or to music performances, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's it's not just limited to the games industry. There's so many avenues for accessibility in general, but I primarily focus on gaming. Hopefully that's a clear enough answer.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I've got a question that's come in from Abdur. Are there any specific companies and organizations which would be good to look into? Dom, do you have any thoughts on that? Specific organizations that are particularly good as an entry point, or perhaps particularly good at accessibility? I'm sure you work for one yourself.
Well, as SK mentioned during his set of questions, Xbox and Ubisoft are probably the kind of prime companies at the moment who are driving accessibility. through not only their games but also from Xbox's side their products. So I would definitely say, in terms of the big companies, those are some to look towards. But equally, there are smaller companies that are starting to implement things in all different ways. So, going from the right smallest to like a one-team studio called Low Tech, which is LOWTEK games. So primarily they create games to support with people with dyslexia, but because of the kind of intersectionality of that accessibility, they do a lot of work around subtitles and other aid specifics for oh my god, the words coming out of my brain now. But because of the work they do, it aids itself to wider forms of accessibility. And then studios such as Endreams and NetSpeak Games are companies to also look out for, because they're developing their accessibility, but also they're widely inclusive companies that again have this really great culture and great processes. So those are some of the companies. Oh, and I'd definitely say Fire Sprite Games, who have recently just been acquired by PlayStation, who work with Guerrilla Games, who are creating the VR equivalent to Horizon's first VR game. And overall, the studio is, again, working towards making their games accessible and inclusive. So I'd probably say, from the top of my head, those 5 companies are ones worth watching. But if you gave me enough more time, I'll definitely be able to give you more and more companies to look out for different reasons.
So what I'm sure we can do, if there are any further questions, we can accept emails and we can pass them on to SK and Dom for their expertise as well. I'm very aware we're reaching the end of our allotted time. So do we have any more urgent questions coming in? It'd be great to hear one or two more while we've got the chance and while we've got the experts here.
Sorry, if I may, just while we're waiting for any other questions to come in, I would say that also, along with Dom's list, I would also say that if we look at on the PlayStation side of things, we've got companies, we've got studios like Sony Santa Monica, who are releasing God of War Ragnarok on November the 9th now. That's just been confirmed as of yesterday. That's going to have a lot of accessibility. It might even be fully playable as a game without sight. That's the speculation from myself and others. And also, of course, you've got Naughty Dog, who are working on The Last of Us Part 1, which, though they've not given too much information away yet, does seem like it might also have a lot of the features from Last of Us Part 2. So there might be 2 fully playable games coming out from 2 Sony studios in not very long.
This is a great point that's just come in from Matthew. Matthew follows you both on social media already, but what are your social media and content channels so everyone else can make the most of everything that you're putting out there? Dom, I'll let you go first.
In terms of me, you can catch me on Twitter at DominicShaw94. Equally, if you use LinkedIn, hopefully if you put in Dom Shaw or Dominic Shaw 94, you should be able to acquire me too. Those are kind of the 2 main platforms I use. But equally, if you want to see more of the work that I do, check out, again, as well, I'll make sure all these links are passed to the team at Blinded Business so they can attach it and send it through. But also check out raisethegame.org. It's the main initiative I work on, and most of the kind of work that I do that goes public and isn't like for an internal company's systems or anything like that. It's normally driven through that, and especially over the next coming months, there's going to be more and more content on it. So those are the 3 places to catch me professionally.
And as for me, I am Sightless Kombat on pretty much everything. SIGHTLESSKOMBAT. That would be on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and my website is www.sightlesskombat.com as well, should you wish to read my reviews and other things as well, including the Transcribing Games project, which is the big community effort to add audio description to video game footage, though it does go deeper than that as well, with things like text descriptions, transcripts of sequences, all kinds of fun things that we're still working on to gradually put out. But yeah, those are Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube are the main places you'll find me. But you can also email me through my website as well if you want to get in contact with me.
Fantastic. And as Dom said, we will send a follow-up from Blind and Business with everyone's streams and information all in one place. We've got one final question. So this is from Jasper Russell. Great question, this one. Hi, I love programming and currently know C#, Python, Bash, and SQL. What would your advice be for getting into the industry? Sightless.
I would argue this is more of a dumb question, but in terms of that, I would basically say, put your skills out there, create accessible utilities, programs, elements of games. Even showing those off to people, might get you noticed as well in terms of getting a role. But it does, like, I wouldn't necessarily know where the best place to be. That's not necessarily my wheelhouse, but in terms of just getting those sort of prototypes or your work generally out there, compiling it into some kind of portfolio somewhere would be a good starting place, because at the very least then you'll have something to send off to potential clients or applicants, or or people you want to show your work off to, and your skills, your potential skills to other employers. That's the word I was looking for.
Absolutely. And
yeah.
Dom, do you have anything to add? Oh,
have we lost Dom?
We might have lost Dom. We might have an internet issue there. I can say Blind and Business will also help people look for work experience, look for internships, and hopefully create some introductions to try and help you get those opportunities. Like Rebecca said, it's an extremely competitive industry, but as we've seen from Dom and Sightless today, it's an industry that's really trying to do some fantastic things with accessibility. And the way it's moving forward, there should just be more and more opportunities and pathways in. So that's the kind of thing, if you follow up with Blind and Business, one of the employment team will be happy to support you in making approaches, putting applications together, and hopefully doing some networking, which could help you in the future. We're going to have to call it a day on questions now. I know there's a few more coming in, so if you do email myself and Rebecca afterwards, if there's any hot topics that spring to mind once the call is done, we will do our best to follow up and pick Dom and Sightless's brains a little bit more offline. I'm going to pass back to Rebecca and say a big thank you from myself to Dom and Sightless. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much and heard so many things I don't even know what they mean. So I'm going to do some Googling later. Rebecca.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you everyone for joining. Also, just so you know, our emails, my email, I emailed you all before, but it is all lowercase, rebecca@blindandbusiness.org.uk. And for James, it's james@blindandbusiness.org.uk. But we will send a follow-up email anyway, so you'll have our emails through that. And yeah, thank you so much, Dom and Sightless, for joining. It's been so insightful. Thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, hopefully be in contact with you all soon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.